Well, good morning. And this is interesting, speaking into a microphone that is not broadcasting in the room. So I'm Jon Daily. I'm going to talk to you guys today. I don't know how much I'm going to be schooling you guys. I'm sure you guys have a lot to educate me about too, because when it comes to teen drug use, the trends are always changing. So the best I could do is share with you kind of what I do know, and then be a resource for any questions that you might have. Well, let me start off with a story. Go ahead and click to the next slide. So you guys are what, age from 14 to 16 or what have you? 50. How many 15-year-olds in the house? All right, that's a 15-year-old young man right there, locked up at the Sacramento County Boys Ranch on a 3.5-month sentence, who later, because he kept getting in trouble out there, ended up doing 10 months, and after he got out of there, went to jail, and then jail again, and then Rio Casimas Correctional Center. And by the time he was 19 years old, this young man had spent 2 years locked up. Dropped out of high school in 9th grade. Lots of consequences. He got to a point, and I work with a lot of young people, he got to a point where the judge said, if you come back to court, you're going to prison for 5 years, period, for all the other stuff you've been getting into trouble with, and whatever brought you to court today is going to be added on to that sentence. And that young man was me when I was 15 years old in 1985. So how many of y'all saw that? How many of you guys saw that coming? Yeah, you guys saw that coming, huh? Yeah. All right. It's the first time I've given presentations a lot, and it's the first time I thought I'd put a picture of me back in the day on there. Next slide, because Cindy said I need to speak to all the things that you guys are chasing after. So I got sober at about 20 years old, went to college, went to graduate school. I've written a couple of books, How to Help Your Child Become Drug-Free, and then my most recent book on the neurobiology of addiction. And I'm also the founder and clinical director of a program that's only a few blocks from here in Old Fair Oaks called Recovery Happens Counseling Services. So life has gone well when I got well. I was a good kid with a bad illness, like many of you, good kids, you know, and speakers would come to the class. I remember being in school and a speaker would come to the class about drug use, and they'd say, show of hands, how many of you want to be a drug addict? How many of you want to go to jail? And no one raises their hand, you know, of course. And yet the truth is that some of you are going to become addicted in this room as we speak. You know, I mean, like some of you in this room will become addicted at some point, because the stats show that probably 90% of you will have tried a substance by the time you finish high school. And sadly, we can't predict who's going to be an addict or not, but we know that there's so much drug use going on. So let me just ask you guys this question, right? How many of you know another teenager who's used alcohol before? Show of hands. You're not going to be in trouble. Come on. How many of you know another teenager who's tried marijuana? Show of hands. How many of you know another teenager who's tried marijuana that goes to this school? Show of hands. Alcohol at the school? Show of hands, right? I mean, it's a pediatric illness right now. Teen drug use is the #1 pediatric issue in our country, according to the Nurses Association. So how many of you guys know someone who has used opiate drugs, Vicodin, codeine, OxyContin, heroin, you know, on and on, right? That's the new thing that's been happening for the last several years. So it's a real issue. When I was in school, it was just like people raised their hand around alcohol and marijuana. There wasn't K2 Spice, Salvia, nitrous oxide, Whippets, ecstasy, Molly, Fizz, DXM, dextromethorphan, cough syrup, you know, all that, Adderall, you know, the list goes on and on and on. 2CB, 2CI, like you guys probably have things you can throw into that mix right there that I'm forgetting and overlooking. Cocaine, LSD, and whatnot. So, next slide. So, I want to speak about marijuana real quick because, you know, it's in the news. Should it be legal? Should it be used for medicine? On and on. And there's a lot of belief around there that marijuana is not addicting. How many of you think marijuana is not addicting? Show of hands, not addicting, marijuana crowd. How many of you think it is addicting? It's all right, you could have your own opinion. This is America. You don't have to worry about what the person next to you is thinking. You get to share your truth. Don't worry about everybody else's truth. So back in 1985, when I was in the peak of my addiction before I was at the Boys Ranch, so do you guys know what the active ingredient in marijuana is that creates the intoxication? THC, right? Yep, you got it. You're like, man, I was following the rules. How come you got, like someone who's shouting it out? So THC, so back in 85, back in my day, it was about 4% THC. Any guesses at what the potency of marijuana is today? Yes. 10%. Any other guesses? 30%. Any other guesses? Huh? 12%? All right, so this is government. See, this is when the government takes the marijuana from the growers back in the day, and then they keep it at the University of Mississippi and they study it. And up to 2009, they found that it was 10% THC. So from 1999 to 2009, the potency of marijuana doubled. And what we were seeing with that was people having withdrawal symptoms. Now, back in the day, in the 70s, 60s, and maybe early 80s, people didn't talk about marijuana withdrawal symptoms. They would say if someone used marijuana, they would be tired, they'd get the munchies, they'd crave cookies and brownies and ice cream, and they'd get lazy and play video games and watch TV and not do their homework. Well, that still happens. That part still happens. But then those guys back then just kind of like it wears off at the end of the day, or they go to sleep and the next day is a new day. But now what we're seeing, and next slide, is that marijuana is having withdrawal symptoms. How many of you know the withdrawal symptoms of marijuana? Anyone? Yes. What's the withdrawal symptom? Which one? Headaches, maybe headaches when they're not using. Other people, do you know? Yeah.
Anger issues if you're not getting the substance in your body.
Certainly irritability if they're not getting the substance in their body, for sure. Also, anxiety, loss of appetite, and problems sleeping. A lot of marijuana users who have been using consistently will say, well, I use because it helps me go to sleep at night, when in fact, it's not like they had a sleep disorder and then all of a sudden started to fix it with marijuana. Many of them had never had a sleep disorder but started using marijuana, and then all of a sudden they had to quit for whatever reason. Their drug dealer was out, they were out of money, or their parents were setting limits and drug testing them, and now they're 4 days off of marijuana saying, hey, I can't sleep very well. Well, that's because they're going through a withdrawal from the marijuana. The other thing we know about, and I won't get into a lot of statistics, but this isn't that old, it's 2 years old, is that young people, teenagers who are using marijuana, have decreased IQ points as a result of using marijuana. And the research is also there when it comes to alcohol use. So to decrease in IQ points by 8 points. That research has been there for alcohol, and now it's showing up in the last 2 years for marijuana. We don't know how much of an IQ cut a teen takes when they're using marijuana and alcohol and Molly and Adderall and Vicodin or Norcos or other drugs as well. Next slide. How many of you guys have heard of wax, dabs, or butter? Show of hands. Like almost more than marijuana, right? Everyone's like, bam. So who can tell me what this is? Sure.
It looks like all of the THC in marijuana into like a ball.
I think you put it well. All of the THC kind of removed and put into a ball that looks like this wax. It's a very dangerous process too. Does anybody know how this is made or processed? Anyone know how people go from marijuana leaves or buds to wax, dabs, or butter? Anybody? People are like, I'm not admitting that one though, because that's too much information right there. No. So what happens is they take a container like this, and they fill it full of marijuana, and then they put a lid on top and poke a hole in that lid, and then release compressed butane into this container. Butane is a fuel, it's a gas. On the bottom of this container, they drill a couple of holes so that the butane can go through the marijuana, and then that liquid gas pulls the THC out and drips down to the bottom. Now, in the meantime, what do we have when this is full of compressed butane? We have a pipe bomb. And there's been many cases, and a case here on this campus a couple of years ago, where a kid was processing that, it exploded, and they got 3rd-degree burns. Not uncommon. The fire department has to deal with this. UC Davis Emergency Burn Center has to deal with this. It's not new information. So then, this is here, 73% THC. And this is what a lot of the marijuana users are doing today. So how many of you guys, show of hands again of how many of you know somebody your age, close to your age, that's used marijuana? THC, right? How many of you guys know somebody your age who's used wax dabs or butter or this stuff here? Right? So still a lot of hands are up. Now here's what's a trip about this stuff. Do you know what some of the side effects of this is? And I've done media interviews. If you want to hear from a person who's a young person talk about their experience of this, you can go to my website at recoveryhappens.com, click on newsletters, scroll down to the newsletter that says wax dabs and butter and psychotic breaks, and look at the interview I did with the media and then a client sharing their testimony. So what we're seeing is that this is creating a lot of psychotic breaks. People are hearing things that are not there, seeing things that are not there, getting very paranoid, sometimes telling their parents that they're scared, they need to go to the doctor, they don't know if they've been poisoned or what have you. So they kind of lose touch with reality a little bit. It's not happening to everyone, but it's happening. The other thing is, with regular marijuana, where we saw the side effect being loss of appetite, because this is so potent, we're actually in some cases are seeing weight loss for people who are using wax dabs and butter because they're not eating. Yeah, show a question?
Oh, no, I was going to say this is kind of like schizophrenia.
It's like a schizophrenic break, like sort of. But there's a difference between psychosis and schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, if you have it, is going to be around. It's not going away. It could be medicated. Psychosis and psychotic breaks are like temporary episodes of loss of reality. Have any of you heard of anybody having this type of an experience with this drug? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is what's happening today. Alcohol, need I say anything about alcohol? Of the clients that I've worked with and know about over the years, from my colleagues, not just myself, since I've been at it for, gosh, 15, 16, 17 years, know of about 20-something people who've died from their drug addiction, and 80% of the time it's alcohol related. Now we're certainly, and then what my experience has been as a professional working in my office, a mile from your campus, is that marijuana is the #1 drug that is sending young people off to rehab. And that's because there's probably more marijuana going on. So this is the #1 killer for young people. It's not like they just overdose from the alcohol, but it's drinking, getting into a fight, somebody gets injured or somebody gets stabbed or somebody gets pushed over a bridge. These are all examples I've heard of. I've got clients that are in prison because they were young adults. They went off to college and tried to get into a party, and people weren't letting them into the party. They were all drunk. Someone pulled out a knife. Somebody got stabbed. And guess what happens? You're guilty by association. So if you guys right here are trying to get in a party, all 5 of you, you're all drunk and you stab him because he's not letting you into the party, you're identified as the stabber, these guys are going to prison too. And that's how it works, just so you know. If you're hanging out with your boys that are trying to be hard and thug and crazy and all that, and they do something stupid, you're going down with them. So be prepared to take the rap, because that's how it goes. Heroin. Man, you guys are all familiar with the heroin thing. How many of you guys know of someone who's tried heroin? Show of hands. Yeah, so we've had that talk. This is a bad deal. I mean, I know of 4 cases of teens and young adults who've died in the Folsom area in the last year from heroin. I don't know what to tell you about it other than it's super dangerous. Once you get hooked, the physical withdrawal from it is like so hard on the body. Once you stop using, if you're not assisted with medicine to get off of the substance, it's like a truck hit you. Your bones, it's like a flu. Your body's aching. Your muscles are hurting. You're all cramped up. You want to puke. You have headaches. You're sweating. You have diarrhea. That's a horrible feeling. And what happens is when you're in that place of just desperate, wanting to feel better, you know that heroin will make all those symptoms go away. So then the heroin addict does the heroin to make those symptoms go away, just to feel normal, not to get high. You see what happens? At first they start doing it to get high. It's all pleasurable. Yeah, this feels great. And then all of a sudden their body is so hooked on it that now they have to use the substance just to feel normal. Next slide. And then one more time. One more time after that. Perfect. So here are the stages of drug use. And I want you to really go through this and inventory for you, because I'm not going to ask for show of hands of how many of you have tried alcohol or marijuana and all that kind of stuff, because we don't need to know all that. What's important is that if you've tried something, here's how it goes. If you've never used drugs in your life, you're going to hear this presentation today. I know this because I've been at it for a long time. You're going to hear this presentation today and go, man, that was informative. I need to be strong and stay connected to my truth, and I'm going to stay clean another day. For those of you who've already started to use, you're going to hear this lecture and go, yeah, I don't relate to dude. That was him. I got control of this. It's no big deal. And then others of you who already have a history of use are going to go, all right, some of this is making some sense to me. I need to check myself. So whatever your truth is, just be open with you, not your neighbor or me, as I go through this. So the stages of drug use. Experimentation. Experimentation is defined as a one-time event. That's it. Once you experience intoxication, you can no longer call yourself an experimenter. Once you put these chemicals, the joint or the alcohol, into your brain and it mixes with these chemicals, you got the result. You either like it or you don't. There's no need to keep doing it and calling it experimentation throughout the teenage years. It's not an experiment anymore after the first intoxication. Misusers are the kids who are using on infrequent social occasions, not the weekends, but like Halloween, graduation, New Year's Eve, 420. How many are all familiar with 420? April 20th, right? That's like so played out, like everyone's heard of all that. That was like news 15 years ago. I'd give a talk and kids would raise their hands and staff and parents were like, what's 420? But now everyone knows. So experimentation, one type of event, misuse, infrequent use for the purpose of intoxication, but what I think is more important than frequency of use is the relationship that someone has to the intoxication. Experimenters and misusers don't yet have a pathological relationship, an attachment, like a boyfriend and girlfriend kind of thing, right? They don't have a relationship to intoxication. So if consequences occur from the drug use, right? You're out drinking this weekend at the river, the police bust you, your parents bust you, someone tells the school and the school pulls you in and busts you. If you're an experimenter or a misuser, guess what you do? You stop using. That's it. That's the definition of an experimenter and misuser. They don't have a relationship that they're trying to protect and hold on to. But as the issue feeds into now substance abuse or addiction, which is, by definition, I now have a pathological relationship to intoxication in my life. So I'm going to figure out how to hold on and protect my relationship. How am I going to stay high? How am I going to stay connected to other kids who use drugs like me so that when I'm out of supply, I can go to them. And when they're out, I can share with them. And in that way, we keep each other like in denial that it's a problem. We keep each other in supply, And when consequences occur, well, I just try to figure out how to beat a drug screen because I'm trying to protect and hold on to my relationship to intoxication. Right? Do you guys feel me with that? How many of you guys know somebody that's like that right now that's your age? That they have a relationship to intoxication that they're continuing to use despite the fact that it's already created negative consequences. So about 25%, a third of you are raising your hands, right? So you've seen this. You're already seeing this play out as an issue. Now, the belief system is something like this. Kids will be kids. Boys will be boys. Girls will be girls. It's the teenage years. It's a phase of life. It's a rite of passage. I'll just outgrow it at the end of the school year, or I'll outgrow it when I start college, which is absolutely not the case. The problem only gets worse. It doesn't get better, right? How many of you love ice cream? Cookies? Cake? Because I know some of you might not be ice cream people. You might be more on the cookie side or the cake side. I get it, right? Now, if you really like cookies, ice cream, and cake, and you really like it to the point where when your parents try to set limits on it and say, stop doing ice cream, cookie, and cake, where you're like, I'm going to sneak me some ice cream, cookies, and cake, but I'm going to quit when I graduate high school. Do you really think you're going to quit when you graduate high school? Or are you going to go off to college and go, all right, where's the little dessert bakery place around here? Where's the ice cream parlor? You see what I'm saying? That's how it goes. If you are in love with a boyfriend, girlfriend, what have you, that's a relationship. That's an attachment. And someone says, well, they're bad for you, but you're like, no, you don't get us. We're in love, and we're going to stay together. But once we graduate, then all of a sudden we're not going to be together anymore. How much of a reality do you think that is? You guys are feeling me, right? It's hard to let go of alcohol, marijuana, wax dabs, butter, Molly, ecstasy, dextromethorphan, and a relationship to intoxication once it has occurred. It isn't like, oh, I got this. I'll just quit when I want to. I just don't want to. Yeah, I know I've got consequences for my drug use. I can quit anytime. I just don't want to. The illness actually is this. It's creating consequences, and you don't want to quit. That is the illness, man. How many of you guys know someone that has had consequences and they're like, I can quit anytime I want to, I just don't want to, right? That's someone that has a problem. Because experimenters and misusers have the problem, the consequences that occur, and they're like this, I'm out. These other people are holding on to the relationship, and they're like, I'm not going to let go of this, so I'll just tell myself and you that I can quit anytime I want to, I just don't want to. But the illness is like this. If every time you eat broccoli, you get consequence from your boyfriend, your girlfriend, the school, and other things, right? And it's costing a lot of money to keep up that broccoli habit. Like, you're going to let go of broccoli, right? But with the drugs, it's like, ooh, I'm continuing to figure out why I should tell myself why it's okay. All right, so for substance abuse, now that we're talking about that, you guys are all clear on that relationship to intoxication. Many of you know someone that's in that. I'm sure by the end of today, you guys are going to be like texting somebody like, I was at this thing. You need to quit your alcohol use or marijuana use because you have substance abuse, man. You've been using despite consequences, right? At the end of the day, how many of you are going to reach out to a friend and say, I think you might want to take a look at this? It's real. I mean, I work with addicts every day, and they're like, John, this information is helpful because I need to bring it to a friend. Now, they're not seeing it as their own issue when, in fact, they're using it all the time, but they're like, I'm going to take this to a friend and share with my friend. And I'm like, all right, we're headed in the right direction. Okay, so substance abuse also creates an emotional illness. What do I mean by that? Emotional illness. Well, when we go through the teenage years, the first, you guys are living through the teenage years right now, and I'm so happy I'm not in the teenage years anymore. That was a hard time, man, especially at school where all the social crowds are happening and all the fashion and all the cliques and people are getting hugs and I'm not, or, all that stuff, and being invited to this dance, and I'm like, dang, this is creating a lot of anxiety. I don't even know how to dance, but I really want to go to the dance. You know what I'm saying? And then I got my car, finally I went, and then I'm like, well, I don't want to give everybody a ride, but I feel a lot of pressure around that. And so how do I ask them for gas money, or how do I say no, or all that craziness? That's so much anxiety inside. Do I get a job? How do I get a job? Now that I finally got a job and I have money, how do I say no to everybody around me who's asking me for my money? Do you relate to any of that? How do I see myself? How do I fit in? How do others see me? I have some insecurity because that's normal, but I don't know that it's normal. So what's this mean about me? It means nothing. You're normal. You're supposed to be confused as a teenager. You're also supposed to have anxiety and nervousness as a teenager because you have the pressures of school, family, your relationship to yourself, and how your own sense of adequacy. How good am I at dancing at the dance? You know, how good am I at getting a job, asking somebody out, or being asked out, you know, to whatever it is. That creates anxiety for everybody. That means you're normal. So give yourself permission to be normal. So that's just normal. And what happens for teens, so you have tension and stress. And sadly, what happens as a serious hook when it comes to drug use for teens is they use the drug and all of a sudden they feel like, wow, my stress has decreased. Right? So short-term fix for a long-term problem. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, I don't fit into social groups very well. And then they're using drugs, and all of a sudden drug culture is like, come on in, hang out with us. And so those kids you guys are all aware of who are abusing drugs despite consequences, you know that they hang out with more drug users than you do, right? You see what I'm saying? So now they're surrounding themselves with more people, and then they feel accepted and they belong to a group, but it's drug culture group. It's people that are headed to be dropping out, people that are headed to commit crimes, people that are headed to be injured by this illness. And we can't do a blood test to determine who it's going to be, but we know what the biggest predictors are, and it is those of you who come from family history where your mom or your dad had alcoholism or drug addiction, passes on the gene to you. So that if you try it, you're going to like it more than other people. That's predictor number one. Do you guys know what biggest predictor number two is for who's going to have addiction? The age of their first use. The younger someone is when they first use, the more likely that they're going to be an addict. So, and you guys know what the average age of first intoxication is right now? 12. You guys are, 12. You're on it. So that was that 6th grade summer? Something like that? Yeah. So it's young. Now, it's not that everyone's using every day in 6th grade, but that experimentation day, the average age is 12 for that experimentation. They might not use all the time after that, but I'll tell you this, and you guys know this already. What grade are you guys in? No. Freshman and sophomore, right? Okay. Have you guys been exposed to more drug use than you were in 6th grade? Show of hands. Yeah, that's just easy, right? Have you been exposed to more than you were in 7th grade? 8th grade? 9th grade? It's going to get worse senior year. And guess when it gets worse after that? College. So it's deal with it now or deal with it later. It only gets worse over time, and the risk only gets worse. So you have to be solid in who you are now. If you've already started a relationship to intoxication, take it from me, because by the time I was 19 years old, I had spent 2 years locked up, homeless, dropped out of high school because of my drug use. It took a lot of counseling and a lot of support to get myself well again, to go back to college, graduate school. I teach graduate school today, and I do what I'm doing here today, to spread the word. All right. So the emotional illness. So if you're young and you start using drugs to cope with stress, to cope with anxiety, to cope with depression, to fit in, with other people, then you start to just only learn how to fit in and cope that way. So it works in the moment. You're like, well, I don't need to find other ways to cope. I don't need to find other things to make my anxiety and stress go away. I don't need to reach out to healthy peers and ask them how they're doing coping with things and what we can do today to manage this sense of stress, tension, and anxiety. I just get drunk, and then I just feel like it all goes away, right? Do you guys already know teens that are in that rut? Probably not so many, but show of hands of who might. Oh, there's a lot of teens in the rut? Okay, so you got it. So it stops that emotional growth. Values start to change. Look at this shift where I said, look at the exposure to drug use you've seen from 6th grade until now and how it's so different today. Values change when people start using drugs. So that goes like this. Before I've ever tried a drug, family and school was so important to me. And then here's what happens. When people start using drugs, it goes like this. Family and school get away from me. Drugs stay close to me. The values shift, right? Have you guys seen that with your friends that have used? They're like, get away from me. I don't care about sports anymore. I don't care about clean friends. I don't care about straight friends. I only want to be around drug users. And girlfriend, you're just over clingy and tripping on me. And boyfriend, you're just over in my business right now. Everybody's doing it. Just, I don't know what your problem is. You know what I'm saying? Like, you hear all these reasons why it's okay to use and justify it. And justify the negative changes that are occurring in their life. All right. So it stops emotional growth. It distorts emotions and really, I mean, you guys are in the teenage years, so you're supposed to have a little bit of an I don't care attitude. Just a little bit, not a lot. I'm not giving you permission, just a little bit. When people are using drugs, that I don't care attitude just bumps up like an amplifier was put in that system. It's like, I don't care. Get out of my business. Get away from me. All right, any questions about this so far? Or any comments about this? Because like you guys were really engaged, really paying attention and participating in the show of hands. Anything you guys want to add to this? Am I missing anything? You got any questions about this? That's my excuse to take a little water break. All right. Yes.
You mentioning things that some people know, some people don't. So you mentioned 420, a lot of people know what it is, some people don't. You talk about, Molly, Fizz, DM, all those things. I don't think everybody knows about it.
Okay. So 420 is April 20th, right? Which is the biggest marijuana smoking day of the year. It's been around since 1970. It's not new. Don't think your generation created it. It's been around a long time. That's 420. 4 is for April. 20 is for the day of the month. 420. So April 20th. And then when I was in the late 90s working with teens with drug use issues, the substance abusers and addicts would be like this. Dude, it's almost 420 today for 420 p.m. Or, and the belief was for the marijuana user that if they got high at 420 on the day or the 420 p.m., that they were sharing an experience with someone else somewhere out there who was probably using at the same time. So, all right. And then you guys, so ecstasy is a pill that when you take it, there's a hallucination experience. So like, if I move my hand, it would still have a trail behind it, right? Okay. Ecstasy just renamed itself Fizz or Thizzle, and then renamed itself Molly. There's Molly and ecstasy are the same thing. So I get calls from the media. Well, I did last year, calls from the media, and they're like, can you please tell us about the effects of Molly? And I said, just look up the effects of ecstasy. It's exactly the same thing, just with a different name. It doesn't mean that it's pure MDMA. That's what it meant in the late 90s, but today it's just ecstasy. Part methamphetamine, part something else, and whoever knows what the drug dealers mix into that pill, or the people who are manufacturing the pill. A side effect of that, for sure, is someone who's regularly using that, it will affect their serotonin system and can set them up to have an anxiety disorder or depression. Okay. Did I miss another one? I think that covered. Yeah.
Really quick, something that I learned at one of the seminars about ecstasy. There's a boy, Colson, I believe, that his parents went out and he decided he was going to take ecstasy and he was going to get in the hot tub because it was going to feel good. So he got in there, bubbles, whatever, and he didn't think he could feel anything, so he took another one. Well, ecstasy raises your blood temperature. His parents
Oh, yeah.
he was boiled to death from the hot tub.
Yeah.
Taking ecstasy. So, like
Right.
everybody says, you don't know what you're getting in that pill that you're putting
Right.
in your mouth, but the effects it's going to have on your body.
People do overheat on ecstasy. I mean, that's one of the causes for, thoughts of the causes for seizure. So the part of the brain that regulates your temperature, your body temperature, is the hypothalamus. And so it doesn't work properly when someone's under the influence of ecstasy. So when they're at the raves or the rave club raves or concerts or whatever, and they're using ecstasy, they're drinking a lot of water to try to keep their body cool, because their body's natural built-in system to keep itself cool and regulated is not working properly. So you add that to a hot tub, that's a bad mix. finally, addiction or chemical dependency. Chemical dependency now, you guys have already related to the kid who's using despite negative consequences. Maybe their values are changing. They pulled away from sports. They pulled away from the clean friends to hang out with more and more drug users. Addiction or chemical dependency is all of that, but there's a little bit more obsession. They really are thinking about getting high all the time. They're sitting in class going, when are we going to be out of school today so that I can get high? Or I cannot wait to get my allowance on Friday so I can get high. There's a lot of obsession about it. Maybe they're writing the papers in English class, the paper on why marijuana should be legalized. And then they write the paper again, why it should be legalized. And why, the first time's an assignment. After that, it's preoccupation and obsession. That person that's always like tripping. So they wear the 420 hat, probably not on campus. Their Twitter, their Facebook, their Instagram. Some part of their little ID handle is wax dabs or butter or mushrooms or Molly something or another. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like that says, I want to hang my hat and say I'm part of drug culture. Experimenters and misusers don't do that, and rarely do people with abuse. That is starting to look like addiction symptoms right there, and that's obsession and preoccupation. They're using it despite negative consequences, which we've already talked about. And then the real telltale sign of an addiction is when someone sets limits on their use and they go beyond the limits. And that's what loss of control is. So then they're like this. Dang, that Mr. Daily told that lecture today, and I really relate to it. I'm that pot smoker. Man. All right, but I'm not going to cross the line now. I'm going to set limits. So I'm not going to smoke marijuana during the school days, during the weekdays, only on the weekends. And then they do that for 2 weeks, and then on the third week it's like, well, it is Wednesday and I don't have a lot of assignments, so I'm going to go ahead and smoke again. And then it's Tuesday, and then it's Monday, and then it's Thursday. You see what I'm saying? The line, they just walk over the line quickly. And that's loss of control. All right. Go ahead, one more time. One more time. Perfect. So, denial. Well, any questions about anything so far? So what is denial? Denial is honest self-deception. I cannot see that I'm making bad choices. It's like this for drug users. Experimentation to addiction. What happens when you take, I don't know if this is true, but I heard this from Jurassic Park, that movie back in the day. And I thought, I'm going to use this. What happens when you take a frog and you throw it in boiling water? Frog jumps out. It's like, that's hot. I'm out of here. What happens when you put it in room temperature water, turn it up on high, slowly heats up, it's not aware of it heating up, and boils to death and dies? And that's how I see the relationship to intoxication. At first, it's kind of fun. It's like a friendly little lion cub. No one has a lion cub, but I do. It's about this big, and this is kind of fun. It's something new and exciting in my life. And I play with this lion cub, and it gets bigger and bigger, and now we're not playing now. Now it's wrestling me around. Now it's beating me down, and now I'm getting injured and consequences from this big fat lion that's beating me up. That's how I see drug use. It's slowly, you think you have control in the beginning. It's kind of fun and new and novel in the beginning and kind of cool in the beginning, and then it takes over. The water heats up. So anyway, that is like denial. I don't see that the water's heating up. I don't really think that I'm having more consequences from this lion. It's just kind of happening, So one of the things that supports denial is that when kids start using drugs and develop a pathological relationship to intoxication, they start to hang out with more and more people that are doing the same thing as them. Right? So they're surrounding themselves with more people. And then their frame of reference, their point of view becomes this. Everybody I know uses. That's not the case. Well, it's not the case for all teens, but when you have a relationship to intoxication and you create a world around you of other people who like to be high all the time, then your world is like everybody's using. And it must be normal then. So it supports denial and seeing it, not being able to see it as a problem or when consequences occur. We already talked about some of the, so biologically, you know, people use drugs because it activates a part of the brain called the dopamine system. Have you guys heard of dopamine in the brain yet in health class or whatever? That's the pleasure system. You know, whenever you feel pleasure, that's the dopamine system being activated. And drugs go right to that and activate it. So it activates this pleasure center. And it's hard to walk away from something that's always feeling pleasurable. And that's one of the addictive properties of this. Now, what's tricky for you guys as teens, your dopamine system is much different than the adults in this room. You guys, by default, have less dopamine firing in your brain than we do. And when you experience something that's pleasurable, you experience more dopamine than we do. That's a phenomenon that occurs during adolescence. That's not happening during up to age 12. It's really it's during the teenage years. The brain kind of starts to reorganize itself, and I won't go deep into that reorganization. But teenagers have less dopamine than most people, which means it's harder to be motivated. It's harder to experience full pleasure. And when you do experience pleasure, you get the hug in the hallway, your free throw shot falls down, you get attention, you feel felt, and you feel seen in relationships, you're getting A's on your paper and that sort of thing. You actually experience the dopamine greater than the adults would. I'm like, I got a hug today, cool. I got an A on a paper today, cool. Right? But you guys are like, oh, I feel that in my body. All right. So one of the things about, and I already talked about some of the other pieces of that, so let's move on. Oh, no, we'll go back. Sorry. The hand in the fire. What happens if I put my hand in fire? What happens? It gets burned. And what am I going to do if it gets burned? Take it out. Now, why do you think God or nature or whatever your belief system is created that in me and you, that if you get burned, you should take it out? Why do you think that was created? Yes. Totally survival. Totally survival. Otherwise, if I don't feel it, I'm going to get my hand burned off, right? So it's important to feel pain. Pain serves a purpose to say, don't do that anymore. Now, what happens for people who have a pathological relationship to intoxication, they don't feel emotional pain the way that others do. The type of emotional pain that should be informing them, don't do that anymore. Take your hand out of the fire. So what if those of you in here that don't have a pathological relationship to intoxication will relate to this. What if I said, hey, I want you guys to, when Cindy's not looking, go steal her money and meet me out front, and we'll get some drugs and skip school. Like, let's do this, guys. You guys ready? See how there's a part of you in your gut right now that's just like, don't look me in the eyes, John, when you say that example, because that just does not feel right. That feel right protects you. That doesn't feel right is a protection, right? People who have a pathological relationship to intoxication are like this. That goes away. So they're like, I'll take money from my mom. I'll take money from dad. I will skip school. I will not do my homework to the standard that I know I can't. I will not show up for practice. And there's no consequence to that. There's no feeling of the consequence, I should say. There's not the healthy shame, not the healthy guilt that says, no, I'm going to make the right choice and go to practice and not steal money from mom. So when people develop a pathological relationship to intoxication, it deadens their sense, that sense of emotional pain in the gut. Does that make sense? Kind of abstract a little bit. You with me on that? Finally, the other thing that supports denial is systems, right? If you're pulled over at the park and you're smoking weed, and the cop does not call your parents, that is actually helping participate in your problem, right? If you are busted by someone, a teacher or a counselor or administrative staff on campus for drugs, and they're like, hey, I'm just going to throw it away this time. But next time you're in trouble, that's participating in the problem. So you might have family members that are part of that problem. They're like, I don't care if you drink, you're a teenager. I don't care if you smoke weed, I do it. I don't care if you take pills, what grandpa does. You know, that's supporting your denial then, right? Some of you come from families like that. So that's why I'm saying it. 25% of the families I work with have a parent, though they're high functioning, who are active in their alcoholism or some type of drug addiction. So sadly, some of you come from those family histories where the family doesn't really care if people are using or are in this illness because they've been in it for a long time themselves. And then okay. All right. All right, that's fine. We'll move it forward because we got to pay attention to time. Keep going. I already talked about these. So let me talk about this one real quick. The adolescent brains are not fully grown. So right now, your brain is still growing and adapting to the environment. And it wants to be in balance. So you have neurotransmitters in the brain that are trying to figure out what balance looks like. So have you guys heard of dopamine? Right, I talked about dopamine. That's the neurotransmitter in the brain that helps you feel pleasure and happiness. So too much of that neurotransmitter is actually bad for you. That's what that can create. That's like schizophrenics have too much dopamine. People with Parkinson's disease have deficiency in dopamine. So it needs to be balanced. It's not like, hey, dopamine feels good. We want 1,000 units of dopamine. We always want balance. We want the right amount. So your brains are still adapting to the environment. Now, it wants the right amount of dopamine. It wants the right amount of serotonin. Do you guys know what serotonin does in the brain? It helps you to not feel depressed. It helps regulate your appetite. It helps you go to sleep at night. It helps your impulsivity when you feel like throwing something or throwing somebody or whatever that angst is. Serotonin kind of kicks in and says, hey, let's put the brakes on. Let's think before we act a little bit. There's also a neurotransmitter which is deeply important to you guys as teenagers, and that's a neurotransmitter in the brain called GABA. Because GABA helps us deal with stress and anxiety. And every one of you have stress and anxiety in your life. I get it. I'm a therapist. I work with people all the time. And I was a teenager once. And I'm also a person who reads the research. You're supposed to have anxiety. That means you're normal. That's all that means is you're normal. So just give yourself permission. And GABA fires when you have anxiety and stress to make it start to go away a little bit. Now here's what happens when your brain's developing and you use drugs. Alcohol activates that GABA system. So when someone's using alcohol, the brain says, oh, I can stop producing GABA because alcohol comes in every weekend. And then the weekend's over, the brain doesn't just start firing GABA again. It starts to not fire it as much because it thinks it's going to come back next week. And so marijuana activates serotonin. So now the person's smoking marijuana 5 times a week or on the weekends, and the brain says, well, I don't need to produce serotonin because it's coming in from these joints and bongs and e-vapes and e-pens and trippy sticks and on, right? So then the person stops using, and guess what? Those systems are now slightly broken. That serotonin system is slightly broken. That GABA system is slightly broken. That dopamine system is slightly broken. And that's neurobiology. And then the psychology linked to that is, now I'm craving. Now I want that substance to balance out my brain chemistry. So now I'm craving. And then that's the psychology, right? Biology, psychology, and now here comes the behavior. It's walking and trying to figure out how can I get more of the substance. And that's the trap that people get locked into when they use as teens. The younger someone is when they use, the more likely that this is going to happen. All right, next slide. We're going to go on to the next one. So what we know today, remember what the average age of first intoxication is? 12 years old. So if you use at age 13 or younger, that's the blue line that says you have a 42% chance of having addiction in your lifetime. You know what the red line is if you also come from a family history of alcoholism or drug addiction. It adds 15% to the risk factor. So do your own assessment if you've ever used. Your age at first intoxication, 13, 14, 15, And if you have family history of alcoholism or drug addiction, you're the red line, not the blue line. And that's the risk for addiction as adults. Next slide. 7 minutes. All right. These are just pictures of the brain affected by marijuana. It should be smooth, with a lot of color, and you can see these holes in there. It's not actually a physical hole like someone took a chunk of brain out. It's just that there's no metabolism. The brain's not firing in that area the way that it should be. Next slide. Same thing here. This is a 17-year-old who's been using weed daily for 2 years. That just means when they were 15, they started smoking weed regularly. And by the age of 17, they were using it daily. How many of you know that kid? You do. That's classic. It shows up at my office all the time. Next slide. This is alcohol. Look at the damage alcohol is doing and decreasing IQ points, which I've already talked about. Alcohol is super bad on the brain. And super dangerous. We already talked about that at the beginning. Next slide. All right. This is the final slide before there's questions. If you have been in trouble, if you've used alcohol, marijuana, or any drugs, I want you to inventory yourself with this. And what's going to happen in the future is that if kids on campus get busted with using drugs or alcohol or what have you, they're going to have to do this. They're just going to have to do it in more detail than you are as you sit in this chair. If you have any relationship to intoxication, what you want to do is start to inventory. How has it negatively affected my life in the areas of family? When was the first time I got busted by my parents? What did they do? How did I feel? Was I scared? Was I worried? Was I mad? Did I tell myself I was going to stop using drugs? Maybe I did stop using drugs. Then as time went on, I started using again. Had my brother expressed concern? My sister expressed concern? Have I taken money, jewelry, alcohol, pills from my parents? And sadly for some, have I taken marijuana from my parents? Money. How much have I spent on it? Well, see, I smoke 5 times a week, and it costs me $10 every day to stay high. So that's $50 a week, and I've been using this long. Well, what's that total? Where did you get the money from? Did you steal for it? Did you sell for it? Did you trade for it? Where does it come from? Have you had any consequences from it where you got in trouble with the law and you had to pay probation fees or fines or counseling fees, or your family has to? School. How has it affected school? Usually, you tell yourself you're not going to use during the week, you use during the week, you don't do your homework. Or you tell yourself you're going to do your homework after you're not going to get high until you do your homework, and you get high and you don't do your homework, or your grades are just going down. You start the semester off like this. This semester I'm going to do really well in math and English. And by the third, and I'm going to decrease my summertime drug use. Some of you have come into this semester having partied it up over the summer, and you're telling yourself, or you have friends telling themselves, but when school starts, I'm going to reel it in. Right? And then 3-4 weeks into it, it's trying to get it back where it was in the summer, and by 6 weeks into it, it's worse than it was in the summer. School's affected. Sports, legal, health, on and on, right? So it's looking at all these areas, and how has your chemical use, alcohol, marijuana, whatever, created negative consequences in these areas. All right, so this is the time for just questions. If you guys have any questions about anything I shared or concerns that you might have of somebody else that's in your life on this topic. Do you have a question? No? All right. That was the don't ask me a question hand, right? Yes, sir.
So how much time would your life be notified if you use alcohol?
So, back when I was a kid, they'd say stuff like this. If you smoke cigarettes, it's going to take this many years off of your life. I don't know that anyone has done any research about that at all, because it's so different for everybody. I mean, we could take, for example, when I talk about experimentation, misuse, abuse, and addiction, what we do know is that 40% of teens who drown this summer swimming, it's alcohol related, right? So that's 40%. But that might be their first time using. Or maybe they were using alcohol every day. We don't know. We just know that there's risk there. And the more that someone's using, the more likely that there's risk to all kinds of things. Yes.